There are a lot of treasures at Westmont College, particularly in people. And one of the treasures here has been for me, and from the moment I arrived at Westmont, is Dr. Greg Spencer, professor in our communications department. Greg is a wonderful professor, a fine thinker, and a good friend. And he's written a terrific book called Awakening the Quiet Virtues. And you'll be hearing about that because it really fits in well with this general theme of Christian counterculture, which we'll be looking at from time to time through this semester. So you get him today, and we get him on Friday. And Greg, we're delighted you're with us today.
I awoke to the sound of gunfire. I lurched out of bed and ran to the window. Would I see a psychopath shooting up into the sky? No. There in the driveway, a car backfired as the driver threw my newspaper onto the honeysuckle. I stumbled out the door and squinted down at the headlines: economic problems, terrorism, a sex scandal. I ran back inside. After a shower, a shave, and breakfast, I completed 10 minutes of devotions, including 20 seconds of high-quality prayer. And then I checked my email, and I heard the microwave ding, and I took out my reheated coffee, and I checked my email again, and I kissed my wife goodbye, and I went out the door, and at the grocery store, I waited impatiently in line. Oh, such a long line, 3 people. And I heard the boop, boop, boop of the cashier's scanner, and I overheard an angry woman shouting at her husband, her stupid husband, and I listened to the blaring music coming out of the earbuds of the guy in front of me, and on, and on, and on. Oh, the noise. Noise, noise, noise. On any given day, most of us would agree the Grinch was right. I probably don't need to convince you that we live in a noisy world. I mean, we are assaulted by physical noise. Phones, music, advertising, and in my case, the incessant meowing of my elderly cat, who demands to be petted every second of his waking existence. And images shout at us visually. The television, the internet, movies, magazines, they all flash by our eyes so fast that we often end up overstating certain photographic values of beauty, artistic composition, flashiness, and newness. Media scholar Todd Gitlin says that as we watch, something feels uniform. A relentless pace, a pattern of interruption, a pressure toward unseriousness, an anticipation of the next new thing. So what do you think? Does this describe the physical noise in your life? And there's also cultural noise that we hear. Contemporary America is sending us thousands of messages a day, from get the perfect body to tune in tonight for some terrific violence. One message that we hear over and over again is that freedom of choice is the highest good, more important than personal integrity or being merciful. I mean, if we could just do everything we want to do, like the celebrities do, we could have more fun. And more fun is more fun than we're currently having. And that's good. And while we're at it, let's have extreme fun. Snowboard off a cliff. Make love for 10 hours straight. Drink till you're insane. Our culture also sends us a message that faster is better. Impatiently, we shout, "Come on," to our lazy microwave. Or we raise our hands in frustration because our computer takes so long to boot up. Oh yeah, and we need to save the world, and we need to do it now. We hear other noises too, physical noises, cultural noises, and we hear emotional noises. Noises that shout at us from our past. Maybe sexual abuse, parenting mistakes, estrangement from friends, or in my case, the suicide of 2 friends. And these noises can lead us to persistent doubt and despair. So, what does all this shouting lead to? I would like to make the unsurprising claim that deafening noise makes us deaf. I mean, it makes sense. We tend to notice what's louder and more attention-grabbing, as some of you, even right now, are paying attention to your phones, because that's so much more interesting than what I'm saying. But what about the other side of the continuum? The quieter, less noticeable behaviors. That's what I want to draw our attention to. I mean, might what's flashy create a diversion such that we miss out on what is happening on, or the flashy makes us deaf to the gentler side of things? I mean, my point is really a simple one, that it's not easy to hear what gets shouted down. And sometimes we worry, we get all upset about what might be happening to us, that we're becoming like the louder and more decadent parts of our culture. But I wonder if our larger problem might not be the gaining of imitated immoral behaviors, but the losing of subtle, soft-spoken character qualities. The noise of our culture overwhelms what I call the quieter virtues: discernment, innocence, authenticity, modesty, reverence, contentment, and generosity. And because we tend not to notice these things, because they are shouted down, I want to give some voice to these virtues, these qualities of life that I think Jesus calls us to. So with this background, this introduction on what it means to be countercultural, let's take a look at one of these quieter virtues: discernment. When our 3 daughters were young, my wife and I had this annoying habit. If they were invited to, say, a birthday party, we would call ahead, or we might go over and check in with the mom or dad and find out what the party was going to be about, maybe what movies were being shown. So one time when our 2 younger daughters were ages 7 and 5, remember that, the hosting mom said, "Yeah, we're going to show a movie. We're showing Cat Ballou." Janet and I were absolutely dumbfounded. I mean, we had seen Cat Ballou years before, and we knew it wasn't kids' fare. I mean, not only is the lead male drunk easily half the movie, the lead female, Jane Fonda, according to the jacket blurb, was in her sex kitten phase. What kind of discernment led this mom to think that this movie was appropriate for children ages 5 and 7? Well, lest you think this example is too tame or just for kids, my students tell me about their struggles with discernment. They say that they struggle between discerning sexual content that is all right or permissible to watch and sexual content that is pornography. They say they struggle between truth-telling and deception, between sharing and gossip, between moderate drinking and alcohol abuse. But of course, as you well know, sometimes students don't struggle at all with discernment. Sometimes they raise their 2 hands in worship and their 3 beers at the bar with equal enthusiasm. And when I speak on the importance of discernment here or there, especially when it's connected to the media. I always hear from somebody in the audience, oh, that is so important. I mean, I am really, really concerned for the children. And it's great. We ought to be concerned for the children. But I want to know, what about adults? What about us? What is the state of our discernment, this quieter virtue? I mean, shouldn't we be interested in wise decision making? Doesn't Jesus care about our choices? We forget that without use, discernment atrophies. And the writer of the Hebrews highlights this. Anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching on righteousness. But solid food is for the mature, who, by constant use, have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. Distinguishing between good and evil is a mark of the mature disciple, and it doesn't happen automatically. It requires training and constant diligence. Choices that I think are made difficult by three trends in our era. The first trend. I found inspiration for this trend in our era from the classic children's story, The Velveteen Rabbit. Sadly, I'm learning that you all didn't read this story when you were kids. How many read this story when you were kids? Oh, good. The Velveteen Rabbit. Well, anyway, in it, a stuffed animal bunny sits neglected in a boy's toy box. And the rabbit ends up turning to an older toy, the wise skin horse, and asks what I think is a very important question. What is real? Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle? Well, I think readers, even young readers, but certainly the parents, resonate with this story because we all yearn to know what is real. We all want to know what is real, and yet in our world of technological wizardry, we simply cannot tell if what we see is real. I mean, we have absolutely no way of knowing if what we're seeing in a film or on television or in a photograph is natural or manipulated. And sometimes we're left feeling confused and maybe a little bit unnerved. And this anxiety is what I call the Velveteen Rabbit factor. It's the idea that we bear the weight of not being able to tell what is real. We watch a movie and say, well, what was digitally added? We see an ad and we say, well, what does the model really look like? And we have a hunch that this lack of knowledge matters, that we need to know more truth about what it is we're experiencing, but we simply cannot find out. And I'm convinced that the Velveteen Rabbit factor encourages us to abdicate our responsibility to discern. I mean, if we can't tell what's real, we end up often saying, well, why bother? Why bother discerning? The second trend. You've heard of Muzak, elevator music that takes the rough edges off of songs and plays them out in blobby blandness. Well, Chuzak is my term that describes the appearance of making important choices, when, for the most part, we are making insignificant decisions, such as whether we should wear a blue shirt or a green shirt, or what restaurant we should go to tonight. And as I see it, the problem with Chuzak is that it fools us into thinking that we're doing the good work of discernment. I mean, if we agonize over decisions, aren't we in fact agonizing over decisions? I mean, aren't we doing discernment? Well, I suppose. But we agonize over such trivial things. In fact, Chuzak has a way of sanitizing discernment in the same way that Muzak sanitizes music. All decisions, momentous or not, just begin to feel the same. Blah. The third trend in culture. Living in an image-saturated culture, what I call the Imaginarium. I like making up words. Living in an image-saturated culture leads us to think that as spectators, we can gain experience without being affected by that experience. Some of us become what I call ock-jocks. Some of you might know this guy. The ock in ock-jocks is a reference to ocular, vision, sight. So ock-jocks are viewers who brag, they're like superheroes. They can watch anything at all, the internet, computer games, TVs, and not be affected. They say they are thick-skinned, impervious to whatever graphic violence or sex or twisted values that they see. Many of us are ock-jocks. And ock-jocks think they can completely control how they are affected by images. But isn't that why we engage with images at all in the first place? To be affected by them. I mean, don't we watch at the very least in order to be entertained? And isn't getting entertained an effect? And can you control that completely? What happens to you? And I also wonder, and I ask my ock-jock friends, what is so admirable about achieving a state of being unchanged by what we see? Why would we want to be that kind of person who is finally unmoved? So we have these three trends: the Velveteen Rabbit factor, Cusack, the Imaginarium. What can we do to offset these trends? Deuteronomy, I think, provides great help. Now, what I am commanding you today is not too difficult to you or beyond your reach. See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now, choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God. Listen to his voice and hold fast to him. In this passage, life and prosperity are set against death and destruction. I mean, that much is obvious. But I want you to see that these choices are described in greater detail. Life choices are described as loving God and walking in obedience to him. And death choices involve turning our hearts away, being disobedient, and worshiping other gods. As we put on a Deuteronomic lens, there's a $10 word you can take home to your parents and say this justifies Westmont tuition. A Deuteronomic lens, we begin to see how choices between life and death confront us all day long. I mean, not just in the physical sense, saving my physical life, but all day long I am confronted by the choice between life and death. So this passage and the Hebrews passage teach that discernment is absolutely crucial for living well. And it's something that we know enough about to pursue. So in light of these passages, I define discernment as the wisdom to recognize the difference between life and death, with the motivation to choose life. Discernment is a part of wisdom. Before we make that outer choice that might reveal our wisdom, we make an inner choice about what is of life and what is of death. So certain questions, I think, that should always be in our minds. What is life-giving? And what is life-giving? What is life-nurturing? And what is life-threatening? If you remember nothing else from today, and you'll probably remember the cat or my wife at the microwave or Jay Howard in a superhero suit, but if you don't remember those, I hope you remember the importance of asking these questions, and occasionally I will remind you. Of course, as you think about choosing life and choosing death, think, well, is it really that easy? Well, lots of times it isn't. Most of our experience is not all life, that is, encouraging a friend who just told us that her mother has cancer, or all death, biting the heads off of an endangered species of turtle. Gross. So, what about the movie Lars and the Real Girl? Lars and the Real Girl is the story of a pathologically shy man who orders a life-size doll from a porn shop and then treats her as if she were his one and only friend. I think Lars and the Real Girl is a life-affirming film. But, of course, it's not all life. Some of you might disagree, and we might talk about this. The work of discernment is not always easy because many of our choices are not black and white. I mean, should I go home today and murder my wife? I'm pretty sure I know the answer to that question. My discernment there is clear. But about many things, I'm less sure. We know that some of our friends are smug and spiteful, but they're also shrewd in a good way, and they're insightful. Some blogs we visit name certain truths about political life, but their humor is vulgar and full of ridicule. And here's the thing. I am not going to give you a long list of what is of life and what is of death. That's your job. Besides, I just don't have enough time. But I want to say that this task of deciding what is of life and what is of death is essential to living counterculturally. I think Jesus was good at discernment. So at the very least, what I'd like us to do is to have conversations about discernment. Many conversations. Daily conversations. When you begin a romantic relationship, what would it mean to ask the question about what is life-giving and what is life-threatening? What does this relationship call out of me? Are these things that are called out of me of life, or are they of death? If I take these choices now that I'm making in the early stages of this romantic relationship and extend them for a month or a year or 5 years, would I say that these choices are life-affirming? You have to do that work, but let's be about that work of discernment. One last idea. As with all of the quieter virtues, discernment is aided by a spiritual discipline, a practice that puts us in a better position to follow through with discernment. And I think discernment's spiritual discipline is attentiveness. Attentiveness. Attentiveness can be seen as the stewardship of the present. And I would like to say that I think most of us aren't very good at this. We struggle being attentive. We don't know how to be good stewards of the present. But if we miss the present, if we can't focus on the present, how are we going to decide about the present, what is of life and what is of death? I mean, we're constantly flitting from email to phone call to internet. And we can't do this good work. We can miss the present in so many ways. We can be dwelling in the past. We can constantly be thinking about our future. We can be so addicted to our phones. I know no one in this room is like this. But some people are so addicted to their phones that they get all panicky if they don't check it every 2 hours or 2 minutes. I mean, my gosh, what if somebody called me while I was in class? We need to become, I think, not multitaskers, but unitaskers. Resisting the popular thought that the more that we cram into a moment, the better that moment is. I don't understand why I can't concentrate enough to read. I put the TV on low, I take out one of my earbuds, and I only answer every other text message. But I think instead of loading up every second, we would be better emptying of all but one thing. That thing that's in the present that we are being called to. That's attentiveness. And as we learn to be attentive, and this, I think, takes a lot of work for us, to be good stewards of the present, we will develop a better vision for what it means to be life-giving and how to address what is life-threatening. Learning to love what God loves and to hate evil. To notice life as the real thing it is, and to choose life with all our hearts. At Westmont, we talk a lot about being a lifelong learner. And I think this quieter virtue of discernment informs this idea. As we seek the wisdom to recognize the difference between life and death, with a motivation to choose life, we commit ourselves to be lifelong learners. Not just lifelong learners, but lifelong learners, life-wide learners, life-deep learners, and to avoid being death learners. Thus, we may finally say with Paul from Philippians, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. So let us attend to these things and be about the work of discernment by God's grace. On the way out, don't go yet. On the way out, you'll hear Brett Denon's song, Blessed. And the song will serve as our benediction for today. He says he wants to celebrate being alive. And to that, I say, amen. You are dismissed.